Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of the Shea Anything podcast. Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you. Andy's been tweeting back and forth with Marcus Stroman. That's fun. Right before the show, we'll get to that in a second. Once again, we're here with you once a week for the rest of the offseason. We'll get some Keith, some Andy, and myself, and it's going to be a busy one. And let's start with that. Since we last spoke, this is a good one. Only the Mets owner potentially has officially been installed in Steve Cohen. Andy was on the air on Friday on SNY when not only did the vote come down from the rest of the owners in Major League Baseball, but the mayor's office released a statement saying, I have no demands. Then Steve Cohen's list of things that he's doing in his first 5 days
completely
in office
unrelated list of things. Yeah,
I thought that was funny. You and Gary Apple, you were like, it's a total coincidence that he's doing these things for the city and that the mayor has no objections.
Nothing to see here, though. All those reporters that told you there was nothing going on with the mayor and the Mets, there's nothing doing with those concessions that came at the same time as the announcement. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, clearly there was some sort of negotiation going on there. So again, Steve Cohen, not yet officially the owner of the New York Mets. The team has not been signed over, but there are no big hurdles remaining. Andy, would you say that's
Correct.
The case?
That you put that absolutely perfectly. As we speak today, just after noon on November 2nd, Jeff, Fred, and Wilpon and Saul Katz own the Mets. But that will change when the deal closes, and there are no expected hitches or contingencies that should stand in the way of that. So the team hasn't changed hands yet, but it will.
And we'll get to the weekend on Twitter with Stephen A. Cohen. I have to admit, very skeptical at first that it was actually him. It seemed like a very fun project for a Met fan out there to try his best to pose as the new owner. But turns out it was. So we'll get to that in a second. Quick promotional items for you at home. Once again, we're covering all of this on Baseball Night in New York, weeknights, 6 o'clock on SNY, talking about everything Mets ownership and what this offseason might look like. Also, want to give you a heads up about the putback. And for you Mets fans that are Knick fans out there, definitely check out this week's episode of the Putback. It's with Ian Begley, SNY's digital series that this week welcomes ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski to the show with free agency. The draft coming up. You don't want to miss Woj joining Ian on that show. Check it out on SNY.TV. Rolls out Wednesday at 4 p.m. So if you're listening to this after Wednesday at 4 p.m., check it out right after you finish listening to us. Ian does a really good job, and Woj is always good. He's the best insider in the biz in the NBA. So that's good stuff. So let's talk about what this week will look like before we look back at the weekend that was, Andy. We're talking about Wednesday when the putback is out there on the web. Mm-hmm. What's the next couple of days of this week going to look like in terms of Mets and Mets ownership, et cetera?
Well, what we know is that it would take up to 10 days to close, 10 days from Friday. The owner's approval on Friday was contingent on the closing happening within 10 days. You can be sure that'll happen. Everybody wants this deal to get done. So in terms of what specific day, look, Steve Cohen wants it to close as soon as possible so he can get going, get to work running the Mets, as can Sandy Alderson. I don't know which day for you. I don't think we can discount the potential distraction of the election this week. If not from a banking perspective, even just from a perspective of timing of announcements and rollouts or whatever, if there's a dramatic election result or non-result on Wednesday, perhaps that's not the best day for Sandy Alderson and Steve Cohen to speak to the public. What the public could be on, our minds could be on other things this week for sure. So I think there's things like that you have, real world things that you have to take into consideration. But the bank closing's moving full steam ahead, and we'll hear from the new leaders of the Mets shortly after.
So it's interesting, Andy, and there's a bunch of specifics I could point to, but I'll just go generally here. So with free agency now open, mm-hmm. A lot of the pieces are being written out there. Some websites that do this for a living try and predict free agent trackers, MLB trade rumors, that kind of thing. A lot of those articles look a lot different to Mets fans out there right now. That, oh my gosh, this website thinks we're going to sign JT Realmuto. The Mets are the favorite. And oh my gosh, this website says we're going to give George Springer a 5-year, $100 million deal. That's awesome. So when you see those things and you have the conversations that we've been having on the podcast and that you've been having with your sources about Sandy Alderson's view of things as a now team president, whatever his title will be, are you skeptical? Do you think that whoever Sandy hires below him, that structure will be in place and he will still not want to give out those big contracts in year one?
Well, look, the variables are the people that he has under them, and that's not settled yet. So, it's right for you to bring that up, and that we don't know who they are, what exactly their philosophies will be, what kind of players they like. When Sandy was a GM, I could look at a offensive player's walk rate and tell you if Sandy Alderson was going to be in on that guy or not. Legitimately, I know what he values. So those are still things we don't know. Is the next Mets GM is George Springer his type of player or not? Does he believe the metrics show that Springer will be a corner outfielder in a year or two, and therefore not a fit? Maybe. What are their philosophies on 30-year-old catchers heading into free agency, even superstar catchers? So those are things that we don't know. I would think that Steve Cohen would want to acquire at least one of these marquee names this offseason. Probably not multiples of them. I mean, look, we've talked about this a million times till it's sort of old hat by now, but the goal of Cohen and Alderson and the new administration is going to be to create a sustainable winner with investment in infrastructure and not to chase big free agents. We've said that time and again. It remains true. Others have been saying it since as if it was their original idea of reporting, but it's something we've known for quite a while. And but again, having said that, one Springer or Bauer or Lindor or something is probably a statement the new owner understands that he could effectively make. So we'll see which way things break, which one of those makes the most sense.
So it's interesting that you're not necessarily predicting, but you're saying it's a possibility that just because Steve Cohen is in place, new owner, new ownership, that it might mean one big splash. One of these big names could be coming to Queens. Even though, are you even at the stage yet where you can report the front runners for whoever will be under Sandy Alderson?
Yeah, no, it's not about whether I can report it either. It's about it doesn't exist. There's this, I've noticed that understandably, it seems like some people think that there's this shadow front office going on right now under Sandy Alderson, and they're making decisions and doing things and talking to candidates, and that's not really the case at all. This whole thing, especially because the approval process was so hard, Cohen's got a little bit of a past that was part of what had to be reckoned with. They've been really keeping this all on the up and up and doing everything in the appropriate order. So they're not conducting Mets business before they own the Mets. I mean, there's no rule against Sandy Alderson picking up the phone and calling a friend of his in the industry right now, and picking their brain about what they think or whether they might want to come work with him. That's not tampering, actually, because Sandy doesn't work for the Mets today. So you could do whatever you want. He could pick up the phone and call Chaim Bloom if he wanted and shoot the breeze. It's not tampering. It would be maybe in 2 days. You know what I'm saying? So he could do these things. And of course, as someone who's preparing for a big job, he's going to be doing some of that. But I can really, truly say that it's all these names that we've talked about before for potential like GM type positions. They're names that are real and have circulated, and sometimes people are lobbying for these things or their friends are. Sometimes there really is Cohen or Alderson paying attention to them. But there's been no interviews. There's been no real process yet. That's how early it is. Look, the Angels have done all these GM interviews. The Mets aren't even at square one with that stuff right now.
So like Robinson Chirinos, his option not getting picked up was Brody.
Brody's the GM, and his job when he wakes up in the morning is to make decisions like that as they confront him. Jeff Wilpon is the chief operating officer of the Mets. Brody Van Wagenen is the GM, and they're running the Mets at this moment.
Man, that's interesting. Just knowing that it's a foregone conclusion at this point that the Wilpon family obviously won't own the Mets in maybe a week's time.
Or
Brody,
less.
yeah, or less. And I guess you couldn't say that Brody is as clearly on his way out as the Wilpons are, because there's an agreement in place that Steve Cohen will own the team. But Brody, for all intents and purposes, won't be the GM. So for him
Well,
to
he won't be the head of baseball, but he is today. But I think that is the most accurate way to say it.
So another thing, I don't know. I guess I look at these trades that Lindor, for example. And I guess I've been putting it the same way since the Mets offseason began, since their season ended in 2020, that is the sign of a big market team. Mm-hmm. That instead of maybe what this conversation would have been under previous ownership, where let's say you trade for Lindor and you're like, well, you hope you can sign him. You hope that he likes it here. You hope he can be your shortstop of the future, but it's a big time risk to include a lot of prospects in a deal, maybe for 1 year of a guy. Whereas if you're Steve Cohen, I think you can make a deal like that and say, we can re-sign him. Like, unless he just absolutely despises it here, has a terrible year and doesn't want to be a Met, we have the capabilities of keeping Francisco Lindor here long term. Do you see Sandy and Steve Cohen being more intrigued by something like that, or maybe Nolan Arenado, than they would giving a 30-something free agent like JT Realmuto a huge contract?
It depends. I think that's going to depend on the player, because the downside of what you just described with trades is that a lot of players have been traded away already over the past couple of years. So to come in and put a further dent in the farm system would be tough. Now, the Dodgers got away with trading for Mookie Betts without giving out much in terms of prospects. They gave away Alex Verdugo, basically. But that was because they took on David Price's contract, which meant they didn't have to pay the prospect cost. And the Indians don't really have anybody like that who's overpaid, and the contracts the Indians would want to dump. So you'd actually have to give up some players for 1 year of Lindor. You have to look at what those players are. I'm not doing it for Dom Smith. I heard that on the radio. Steve Phillips, the former Mets GM, who I listen to in the morning all the time and I like, was saying, how about Dom Smith, Jimenez, and someone else for Lindor? And I'm like, I'm not giving up Dom Smith for Lindor necessarily. I mean, you can sign him in a year. So those are now you got to get into the nitty gritty of what's each individual move going to take. And then you compare it to, hey, look, we've got Rosario. He's pretty good. He's not great. Maybe the money should be spent on the rotation. So everything, it's hard to say one of these things in a vacuum. This is what they'll have to do when the Mets get their baseball operations department together. These are the kind of things you sit around a conference table or a Zoom room and kick around.
But also, the Indians didn't want to pay one of the best closers in baseball $10 million to be one of the best closers in baseball. Every other team, you would think any big market team has all the leverage over the Indians, because they know that the Indians don't want to pay anybody. And look, it's the nature of the pandemic season and the shortened season. And that's what I want to get into next. The idea that this offseason, just like the 2020 season, is going to look a lot different than off seasons of the past. We're already seeing free agents, guys not being brought back, options not being picked up that are surprising. And I thought it was interesting, part of your reporting on Friday, in addition to the Mets want long-term what the Dodgers and Yankees have. Mm-hmm. Now you've added kind of this idea that, like, hey, one thing that the Mets could do is take advantage of the market right now and the teams that have been bleeding money for 2020 by an owner who didn't see those losses and has deep pockets now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a huge advantage that the Mets have right now. So they're going to be really, I think, exploiting that unique part of this year's market. I really do think that if Brad Hand had been put on waivers in a week, the Mets would have claimed him and had him for 1 year and $10 million. As I said, though, Sandy's not running a shadow front office, and the timing didn't line up. But that's the sort of thing. Though I bet you next year they have multiple players who are in this kind of conversation category.
Have you done reporting on whether Sandy would be interested in Brad Hand or likes Brad Hand as a pitcher?
What I'm saying is that now that he's a free agent, well, that's depend on, covering Alderson all these years. It's not so much that he likes a player, yes or no, either. It's like the player and the value. So Brad Hand at 1 year and 10 million was like, yes, please. My boss is rich and I'll take another. but now you just have to see the free agent. There's going to be so many cheap relievers, good relievers on the free agent market that maybe once that shakes out, Hand is no longer the biggest value. Maybe he is. I don't know. Now he's in a completely different. What's he looking for? 3 years. What's he going to get? It's a different conversation around him now that he's a free agent.
I'm looking at our rundown right now as we're kind of working our way through it, and I'm realizing I don't know if we've ever had this much to talk about, and I don't think that that's going to be unique to this week's episode. I think this is going to be an off-season long thing. So an example of this, Andy, and the unique nature of the offseason might be Marcus Stroman. So on Baseball Night New York a couple weeks ago, we had Jim Duquette on, and he suggested and I mentioned the idea that he might be a 1-year deal candidate. Now, you could take the long view and look at it and say players view free agency as what you've been working towards for your whole career. You spend years and years and years in arbitration hearings and not making the money that you think you're worth. And then finally you get an opportunity to get it. But Marcus Stroman made the decision to opt out in 2020, didn't pitch. He has, at least in my view, been occasionally good, oftentimes mediocre in his career. He's a potential number 3 starter. And I'm not sure what that resume is getting you. The other part of this is that he was offered the qualifying offer by the Mets. Now, that's a big price tag for a 1-year deal. 18.7.
18.9, I think.
18.9.
To your point, yeah.
So do you think he accepts that? Do you know how to get in touch with him, more importantly?
Well, it's a new age of sports reporting. I knew we were going to be talking about this, so I asked him on Twitter this morning because I literally didn't want to just be speculative. That's the job, and to try not to speculate and try to have some information. So I said, hey, I added him, whatever his thing was. It Stro? Is that just what his thing is?
You tweeted at him, man.
Yeah, well, that's true. I said, at Stro, yeah. I said, I just asked him if he was going to take the qualifying offer because I didn't want to speculate. And he tweeted back at me an emoji of Will Smith as the Fresh Prince shrugging, which honestly is not newsworthy. It's not a yes, it's not a no. So the way that this used to work is that I would have had this interaction with a player or their agent over text or email or phone, and I would have written something like, sources say that Stroman is considering taking the Mets qualifying offer. Now we just have the same basic news story in GIF form, but that he's considering it. We can report that. And my whole job is to bring the public information. So, hey, I just had a feeling with Marcus that might be the way to do it.
What's a good way to put it? On SNY's breaking news Slack channel, his response was posted. That was breaking news in the mind of somebody at SNY. So clearly his response is newsworthy. Nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is. It shows that he's considering it, and as he should be. It's a tough decision for him relative to applying the word tough to something where we're talking about that many millions of dollars. It's tough relative to the industry he's in. But I am sympathetic to the fact that a player goes their whole life, plays their whole career, gets to free agency. That's the goal almost as much as a championship for any player, is to reach free agency healthy and a desirable player. And he's got there. And now he's got this this draft pick attached to him, which even without COVID, we saw players like Dallas Keuchel and Craig Kimbrell not have jobs until almost mid-season a couple of years ago because of that qualifying offer.
Right.
So now we're talking about teams not spending any money anyway. He really would have a hard time getting a fair deal on this market through no fault of his at all. through fault of both the market, the qualifying offer, and all that. So he has to consider whether to accept it for sure. He has to consider it.
I think I would, and Marcus, here's some free advice for you from somebody who has zero credibility in this space, but I think I would advise him to take it for all the reasons that you just said. And, it's hard. Maybe it's tough on him and the pitcher that he is. And I used the word mediocre earlier. Maybe that's not fair. I mean, I think part of me saying that is he is very vocal about his abilities, very confident in his own abilities. And occasionally, if you follow him on social media, what you see on the field doesn't necessarily match up to the things he says. And I'm not necessarily killing him for that. I just think it does, when you talk about him as a player, it's hard not to view them both because I follow him closely. I think he's a really interesting guy. And I think that sometimes when you listen to what he says, you're expecting, like, he thinks this is a free agent year where he should make the most money he'll ever make in his career. And I think I would say to him, I know you have this confidence in yourself, this belief in yourself, and you've at times been a really good pitcher in the big leagues, but almost 19 million is a good price tag in a year where no one's really going to be getting that.
Yeah, there's logic to that. I think we could go on a detour and look at his performance and some of the underlying numbers and things. Like I would say that he's been a very, very good number 2 or 3 pitcher in this league for years now, and that's extremely valuable. And although he had some not great starts for the Mets down the stretch in 2019, he was such a good pitcher for the Blue Jays for so long in a tough division that I'm buying on the player. I understand what you're saying about his social media, so hyping him up, and some people have been like, you didn't deliver on that hype, but I would argue that over his career he has. But I would probably agree with your economic argument for him too. So we'll see what he does.
Yeah, and you're right. Credit to him. He is a unique pitcher right now. He is as close to a sure thing as probably you can get on the open market. And that would be in the pro column for becoming a free agent. But he's got the draft pick attached. And I think he's seen some of his colleagues have a really tough time with that. It's a lot of money. And if I was his agent, I would say, dude, we'll do this again in a year. And if you pitch well, you can have a 3 or 4 year deal. And I got
more comment from Marcus just coming in, actually.
Oh, really?
So under his gift, someone named Stu Rushfield said, simply from this fan's point of view, take the QO, a hefty sum, prove you're healthy, and then kill it in a normal free agent market a year from now. Spend and invest wisely, and you should be set for life no matter what. Free advice worth every penny you paid for it. Wink emoji. Marcus said, good thing I don't take advice from you, LOL. So I'm saying there's a new comment. That would seem to indicate less of a willingness to take.
Yeah. Look, again, like, part of my issue with that is, like, that's a nice civil tweet. And Marcus has this thing about negativity on his Twitter account where he always talks about how negative people are. And then he claps back at some people that I'm not sure entirely deserve it. That's just somebody who's got his well-being in mind, and maybe a Met fan who likes the player. And he's like, good thing I don't take advice from you. Like,
social media is tough. Sometimes I've had experiences where someone's like 10 people have been nasty to me, and then one person wasn't, but I thought they were, because it creates weird moods and reactions in people. So it's hard to say. If I were Stroman, I wouldn't be on Twitter because he doesn't have to be, but he is. So,
Oh boy, is he.
It's
Well, speaking of Twitter, let's talk about designated Twitter, our segment with Steve Cohen. So by the way, Stroman did say LOL. Jeff, our producer, texted me.
I said the LOL, didn't I?
You did. Maybe it's a joke, and maybe I'm the one reading it wrong. But
there you go. It's hard to say with social media, anything typed, just like with texts, right? Isn't that why emojis were invented? Remember, like in 2011, when every other text was like, "Are you being serious right now?" And it was like, that's why they made emojis, probably.
Right. And by the way, if you're a Met fan listening to this, I'm curious. So tweet at me, speaking of Twitter, how you use Stroman. I mean, he is one of the best pitchers you could have on your team that's a free agent going into this offseason. So that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, do you view him as the pitcher that he basically views himself to be? And did you like his energy on the Mets? Do you think he would be a good fit to accept the qualifying offer and come back next year? But so we had Sal Licata on the show on Friday, Andy, and one of the things that he loved, and I think this is really legitimate, honestly, for Met fans out there, is when Steve Cohen, came out with that original statement after the news on Friday that was not his list of things that he's going to do as the owner, but more just the reaching out to Fred Wilpon and talking about the fact that this was something that he had wanted for a long time. He ended it by saying, let's go Mets. And Sal was like, look, just to have an owner who's been a lifelong fan who ends a statement like that with that. And then he joins Twitter this weekend, or had a Twitter, and no one knew about it. And Stephen A. Cohen, and he's tweeting out, Mets fans, what do you want? And I am curious, given what you were just saying about social media, about whether you're cynical about that, the usage of that, or you view that as a genuine act by Steve Cohen.
I look, it's probably one of two things. It's probably either a good PR advice, which it was, because it got people even more on his side, or just a genuine, like, I'm sitting around this nice living room and looking at my Giacometti, and I just bought a team, and let's log on, let's talk about it. It could have been either. I think he should enjoy it now, because as soon as things start happening, the Twitter reaction will obviously become more mixed. That's just the nature of that platform. Like this is obviously his last moment of being universally beloved, in particular on social media. And that's not a knock on him or on anybody. It's just, we both know that the second that the Phillies make an offer to Real Muto, like, there'll be 50,000 people on Twitter going, Uncle Steve, I thought you were going to do everything. What do you, so he's in a honeymoon phase. You might as well, no downside. It's good advice to put "Let's Go Mets" at the bottom of the news release too. Why not? That's low hanging fruit to make your customers excited. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's true. And I think if he grew up in Arizona and, was just a really rich guy who bought the Mets and said, let's go Mets, you'd be like, okay, yeah, you're the owner. Of course you're going to say, let's go Mets. But given the fact that Mets fans know he's one of them in terms of being a fan, I think that's really valuable and got Mets fans going. And I also think, somebody responds to him and is like, can we do an old timers day? And he's like, sure. That moment was just crazy. I'm on my couch being like, did the Mets owner just basically tell us that suddenly we're going to have an old timers day?
Yeah, that's a good catch by you. I agree. That was a newsboard. I'm surprised there weren't more headlines about that one, because that's been something that some fans have wanted for a long time. And it's like, yep, done deal, or whatever, however he said.
Yeah, he said done deal. It was like, okay.
The Mets owner saying that publicly is newsworthy for sure.
Yeah.
We're going to see Keith in baseball pants again next summer.
Yeah. I saw SNY tweet, I think it was SNY, like, thinking about Gary Cohen calling Ronnie versus Keith.
There you go.
And if you're a Met fan, that sounds like so much fun.
And if you're the owner, why not do that? There's so many easy PR wins, and that's one of them. So why not?
Statues.
As PR, obviously the guy is enthusiastic and would probably enjoy it himself too. But in addition to that, it's just great PR.
Yep. Statues, old timers days, high priced free agents, do it all.
Do it all. Everything. And the second you don't do one of those things, log off Twitter, because it's going to get ugly, Steve.
Okay. So last thing, speaking of high-priced free agents, didn't really get into George Springer as much as our producer Jeff wanted me to. So mea culpa there. And I know the statues thing would have been a good way to end the podcast, but I didn't host my way into that ending. So I got
a George Springer statue.
Well, Do you think there will be one day, Andy?
One day. That's a good way to get it. There you go. I helped you when we got there together.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question with Springer, I think I mentioned this earlier, is how long can he play center field? That's the real question. You want to sign another guy who might have to transition into being a corner outfielder within the span of the contract that you give him, when you might want to lock up Conforto. Sandy really likes Nimmo as a player a lot. Would you rather have more of a true center fielder and go with defense up the middle and find your offense elsewhere? Or do you want to go with Springer, a winning player from, even though his team cheated, he's a winning player. And he cheated too. He was part of that. But good player would make you better next year. I'm not sure defensively if that's where you want to go for the next 4 years. That's just my opinion.
He's such a good postseason hitter, from watching the Yankees try to beat the Astros and watching a lot of Astros postseason baseball over the last 5 years, where sometimes they were cheating, if not most times. He still is just such a consistent postseason hitter that, if the Mets are going to become the next Dodgers, Yankees, a year-to-year consistent competitor, that's a guy you want. I mean, I don't know if you want him in center field for 5 years, which is a key part of the question. But I like the player, and I think, look, could you hypothetically sign Brett Gardner to a 1-year deal and hope that he and Nimmo and, I don't know, maybe you sign Marisnik to a minor league deal, something like that, and try and patch it together? You could do that, but like you said earlier, why not get one of the big names? And Springer could be that guy.
Maybe that's the word. I like Marisnik. Minor league deal, man. Jake Marisnik's agent on line one. They're not going to like that.
I mean, Colton Wong is a free agent, and the Cardinals could have had him, and he gone.
But he'll sign a big league deal. Wong will, I think. I don't know.
He will. Marisnik, I don't know. You want to make a friendly wager?
I'll bet you $100,000 that Jake is. No, that's too much. You're shaking your head. You're not.
Yeah, too much.
Well, that's no fun, and there's no adrenaline to it.
You've probably compiled more savings than I have. I don't have that kind of money, but
I'd have to definitely sell my home. But that's what.
See, I don't have a home to sell. I rent, so you've got.
I guess I have more equity than you. So you know what, kid? Talk to me when you're worth something, and we'll make a nice bet someday.
Yeah, I see Marisnik as a minor league deal somewhere.
Okay, we'll see about that.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. As I keep saying, this is going to be a crazy busy off season. Whether or not I'm saying that in terms of signings, trades, and a flurry of them, I'm not sure if that's going to be the case. But it sounds like the Mets are at least going to be in on everybody, or an option for everybody, and that's exciting for Met fans out there. So, thank you for listening, Andy. Thank you. We'll be back with you next week with Keith Hernandez.